Hello, welcome back. I'm Ed Ballou, and I'm sharing some more tips and tricks about the Helium network. I've gotten a lot of questions on indoor versus outdoor. A lot of manufacturers are coming online with this distinction, and people have asked, what are the pros and cons of each? So we will get into that. Outdoor setups are a little bit more complicated in my opinion, and we'll break those down over the course of this video. So, manufacturing difference. There's CalChip, Syncrobit, Nebra, and Bobcat, I believe, are the manufacturers right now. And is there a difference between them? Well, yes, in their applications and how they've manufactured the boards. Of course, inherently, is there an earnings difference? No. No, they all operate according to Helium network specs, and they've all been audited before they are accepted into the Helium network. So there's not really a difference. It's just the application and availability for these units. So that kind of puts that to bed right away. Now, each manufacturer may also have an outdoor unit that they've already prepackaged for you. And so we'll talk about that a little bit over the course of this video. So, and we'll be primarily focusing on the outdoor setup, the pros and cons of that. Indoor, in my opinion, is a little bit safer, a little bit less risky. It doesn't come without its own risks and tips and tricks and pros and cons. So we'll talk about that. I like to stay away from pros and cons and just give you context to what will help you make the decision for what is best with your setup. So let's start out with the first thing. You'll see that many setups will come with an antenna already attached. So for instance, let me get some props here. So this is the stock antenna that arrived with my original hotspot that I got. And I'm currently using an Emirate hotspot, or Cool Spot as they brand it. There's no difference between the two, just the fact that an Emirate device is hosted and that there's shared proceeds that go out. So you can see that there's some yellow stripes on there, and the people in the forums love to talk about how awesome these are. Their preference is that they're not given, these things are not given enough credit. They're actually quite powerful. However, if you are doing an outdoor setup, this antenna, it will most likely not be in your best interest. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So, because you'd have to swap this out, here's the big trick, is that technically, per regulatory compliance stuff, you are infringing, if not breaking, the rules of the FCC guidelines, because when they sell you these hotspots, they're paired with a particular antenna. This antenna has been qualified to be sold along with the device. Every antenna needs to be certified in order to be used. Otherwise, you're operating technically outside of FCC regulations. Or if you're worldwide, then of course you want to check into your local regulatory compliance. And I think that it seems like in the U.S. the allowances are much more tolerable for the experimentation. However, it seems that there's a resounding feedback that the liability is on you. It is not on the Helium network or any of these manufacturers if you upgrade your own antenna. And so take that with a huge grain of salt when you're doing these outdoor setups, or even if you're doing an indoor setup with an antenna. So more to come on that as we get through this video. So other things with the antenna, of course, is that with cables between your hotspot and your antenna, if you're doing an upgrade from the stock, which again, if you're doing the outdoor unit, it's highly suggested that you have something else other than your stock antenna, mainly because of weather, but we'll get to that. So now, early on, I was doing my own experimentation with my setup, and I started indoors, and that's what I really recommend everybody do. You just don't have to do as much if everything's working indoors and you're okay with it. Now, the first thing I did when I decided to do it outdoor, or to start moving it outdoors, was to figure out how to protect the unit. And so I just went on the Helium Discord. It's a great place for information and also misinformation. So you really want to look through and discern what is the best information for you. I found this little, it says Amphenol Broadband Solutions. This is a box that is not technically weatherproof. There is some weather protective kind of, like you put around a door. Trying to get a good picture of that. These are where your cables would get inserted. So this was like a $20 deal on Amazon, but if you look, it's just not the most weatherproof setup. It does, lock pretty well, and but it's just not the best setup, because it can eventually get stuff in there eventually. So you're taking the risk whenever you go outside with your unit and putting your miner outdoors. Now, keep in mind, a broke miner doesn't get you any rewards. So that's something that you need to be aware of, is if your miner breaks, you can't mine anything. So, and you can't provide coverage, and you're kind of out of luck until you get another miner. And of course, with the supply chain issues that are currently going on, that can complicate matters even farther if you're trying to get another hotspot if yours broke due to weather. And there have been some reports of people getting water to penetrate their setups. I've seen people literally putting these hotspots in like cartons or containers that you get at the grocery store, like for donuts or something like that. Definitely not rated for outdoor usage at all. So again, this isn't bad, but this is what it looks like on the inside. And of course, I have zip ties. Zip ties are great. I can't recommend them enough for having temporary setups to try out and do whatever you need to do to get things, route cable, keep it in place, all that kind of stuff. So one thing that you'll notice is that, and I'm just going to pretend that this is one of those outdoor units that there's a hotspot inside and that there's cables coming out of this. So what you would want to be concerned about is as these entry points are coming out of here, of course you want to think about gravity. And if I mount this with the openings up, then of course rain and all that stuff is going to get in and penetrate this. So orientation of your unit is imperative. Also, if there's knockouts here, so if I wanted to, I could drill that out and put something through there. If you're using, like, that's about a nice size for the LMR 400 cable. Of course, if you do that, then it's more penetration. Or if you have the antenna coming out of this particular hole, any entry point for water is going to find a way in. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So I really do recommend that if you have your hotspot in something like this, or preferably an IP66 rated outdoor enclosure, that's what, again, I'm just kind of repeating what I've found from research. You definitely want to weatherproof this thing as much as you can. And this is just a $20 unit, probably not going to be certified for that outdoor usage technically. So, one thing that you want to do as well when you're having your hotspot in something like this, or if you buy it from a manufacturer with there, you're going to want some sort of cable between your unit and the antenna. If something happens and your antenna falls over, if it's wired directly to your hotspot, you're going to break your connector and break your miner, and then you're going to be out of luck, and you're going to be frustrated while you have to wait for another miner. Of course, you can always buy more and have more on hand as backups, but again, a broke miner doesn't make you anything. And so having some amount of slack in there and a cable to come off of this before your antenna is a good idea. It also, thinking about things like lightning and other weather events that I talked about in another video, but it's a really helpful context to think about protecting your unit in that casing as much as possible. So there's, of course, dB loss over cable. if you get the right cable, I've seen a lot of people trying to go with as cheap as they found on Amazon. And while that may work and may work great for an indoor setup, if you're going outdoor, you really want to think about weatherproofing and dB loss, especially if you're going over long cable runs. I believe the loss on 100 feet of LMR 400 cable is somewhere in that 2 to 3 dB range. I could be wrong on that. If you have some comments on that, of course, drop it in the comments. We're creating a community here. At least that's my intention with this channel. So feel free to correct each other and toss out some facts. I love it if I'm wrong. So just share that and we can get that out to the masses. I think that's really it for the antenna side of it. Whether you have an indoor unit or an outdoor unit, it's really no different. The key thing is having some amount of separation between your unit, if it's in a hotspot, or if your hotspot is in a container like this, that you're separating it from your antenna with some particular safety mechanisms involved in that. And of course, having a nice weatherproof case. Again, this is just a temporary experiment. I didn't go with the grocery store donut container, so just appropriate context to keep in mind as you're making your decisions on indoor and outdoor. Of course, the key in all of this is earnings, providing coverage and getting those proof of coverage receipts so that you can be rewarded for providing that coverage. That's the whole mining aspect of this. So having an outdoor unit, of course, is very helpful. It's very easy to just strap something like that container that I have onto a pole and hoist it up and go wirelessly to your internet connection. Those are very easy things to do. Of course, having it outdoors is a little bit more difficult of a setup, or has its own unique characteristics to it. So, but it does help you with kind of the number one thing of providing coverage is elevation. You can put this thing up on a pole and hoist it quite far as you would care to provide that proof, that coverage. And in all of this, and what I've tried to gear all these responses to is the ROI on your particular question here worth the risk of replacement? If water gets into your $20 box from Amazon, was it really worth it to spend $20 protecting a $300 miner, $350, $400 in some cases, and I think if you go on eBay, it could be upwards of $1 to $2 grand for a miner right now, considering the lack of a supply, and of course the demand that's out there. So think about that as you're thinking, as you're considering, should I put it indoors, should I put it outdoors, should I get the antenna? You know, is the ROI worth the risk of replacement or getting contacted by your local regulatory compliance people? Even though it's public space, I've seen instances, not in the Helium network, but just in general thing of even something as simple as an electronic device that's emitting EMI, electromagnetic interference, that was messing with a cell phone tower, and they proved it. They got to the point of that it was this particular thing, and then they held them liable. The company that manufactured that device, they held them liable and said, you need to fix this or else, because it was interfering with cellular service. So that's how these things start, and so you definitely want to take that into consideration. So that's, again, is it worth the risk? And of course, many people all over are like, oh yeah, absolutely, it's worth the risk, and they're doing it as safely and as smartly as they can. All right, so your next thing to consider in having a hotspot outdoor is weather, and this is the number one thing. Whether you may have the best rated case that's possible, and you still may get penetration. The one thing I learned working at a previous company is, especially on the coast, whenever you're near salt water, is whether you like it or not, that salt will find its way into your units. No matter how much weather stripping, weather protective goop that you put on there, whatever tape, anything that you put on there, it will eventually wear away, which is why I would really encourage maintenance. The more maintenance you can will prolong the life of your devices. And just provide that a little bit more assurance. Of course, salt gets everywhere, and if you're in a hurricane area where that can bring even more salt water in, it's definitely more apt to that the device will fail sooner rather than later. Anytime you go outside, whether it's salt water, wind, rain, or even temperature in some locations, is a very something to keep in your mind as you're going outside with this. There are particular operating limits of the miners. I believe it's down to about -20. I think they give them in Celsius. And then the antennas as well, that you usually want to look for information on what is the operating temperature of these, because they do fail at some point on the low end, and there's also a high end. And through my research, at least so far, they said it was actually more likely that they were concerned about heat. So right now, of course, it's cool everywhere in the northern hemisphere, and so there hasn't been many reports yet of failures because of low temperatures. Of course, as we approach the spring, summer, and the temperatures start to increase, then we could see failures on that top end. So be aware of that. Even if you have something enclosed in this unit, and you're not worried about the high temperatures, because maybe it's it's cool enough, but the device generates enough heat that can keep it warm and within operating specs. When that turns to summer temps and very high temps, that could conversely affect your outdoor unit and cause problems and cause failures. So there lies the question of, is the ROI worth the risk of replacement, and do you have enough parts on hand to replace it or get them quickly? Of course, wind, rain is important. I talked a little bit about having separation between your outdoor unit and the antenna, in case there's some sort of stress relief. Of course, if you connect it directly to your hotspot outside, and then a big wind event happens, and you have this really big antenna connected directly to your unit, that could tip over, get knocked over, and then break your antenna. Not only break your antenna, but also break your hotspot. One or the other is probably going to go. So having some stress relief, think about the failure points of where this could fail if it gets tipped over in a certain way. And then you can kind of plan for those things. At the end of this video, I'll also go over a bunch of equipment that I've used for my outdoor install. And I technically have an indoor unit, but then I also have an outdoor setup for my antenna. All right, so that takes care of weather. Again, that's the #1 risk, in my opinion, that you'll run into, aside from the witch antenna and encountering those local regulations that you may run into. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to talk about before we get into the equipment used is I kind of want to call it service or access. If you're doing this as a business, for passive income, and there's plenty of people out there that are doing this as a passive income, you're going to want to think about access and serviceability. If one of your hosts is willing to keep this up for you, well, then that's much better. But if you're doing this yourself, you may want to have it more accessible and think about placements of everything, such that it's easy for you to get to and easy for you to maintain and all that. If you have to carry around all your materials from place to place and climb up on every single rooftop, that's a lot of time. So serviceability is very important. Okay, so let's think about that a little bit more. As far as power, how are you routing your power? Are you doing what some people are experimenting with, power over Ethernet, or are you just connecting it to just using the normal power means? Your internet, are you using wireless or not at your location? I've heard of some reports of people using somehow some sort of cellular connection to get the internet part resolved. So again, it's what do I need in this area? If I'm just doing this out in the middle of nowhere, well, then that presents its own problems. But if I'm just doing it on the top of my house, well, it's not I don't have to think about these things. Okay, mounting. Mounting is another thing. If you're going to have, if you have to climb up to the roof and then it's on a pole that goes 6 feet above your roof, well, then there's extra parts in there. You might want to think about how can I hoist this and lower it safely such that I'm not endangering myself or others or even the units if they were to fall over. Is it properly reinforced for weather in the area? All that kind of stuff. Cabling with your the way the cables are routed, the length of the cables. Of course, if you're doing an outdoor unit, your cable lengths are much shorter, and I would really not recommend any sort of just direct connectors from your device to the antenna. Make sure to have some sort of flexible cable in there. Even if it's just a shorter cable that can provide some flex, you're protecting some amount of your setup. It's also good to, we've been talking about redundancy and ROI, worth the risk of replacement on your hotspot, but there's also the ROI, or is it worth the risk of replacement for your antenna or your other equipment in your setup as well. Having a durable setup is reinforced in many ways, and thinking about points of failure from different angles will really help you have the best setup you can. Also, drilling holes. That's another thing. If you're doing an indoor unit, you may have to drill your holes. And now in one of my setups, I was able to find an existing hole in the outside of the house that had enough give that I could push the cable in there without drilling a hole. So that was really great. Another time, I actually had to drill a hole in my house, and I have an example of what I would use in that scenario. So in doing this, I found a really nice thing. This is at a local hardware store, of a gigantic drill bit. So you can see that this is probably about, I don't know, 12 inches long, 16 inches long, something like that. And the cool thing is, let me find it here. In the middle of this, you can't quite see it, but there, where that little white part is, that's actually a hole. So you could put it through the wall, and then put a piece of fishing line or a small string in there, and then pull your cable back through as you're done. So this was a really cool thing that I found at a local hardware store that was the appropriate width for a LMR 400 cable. And so that was, and I'll just kind of show that there. This was a 1/2 inch. Oh, it's actually 18 inches long. So there you go. And again, it's branding doesn't, I'm not too concerned about the brand or quality of the device thing that I'm using. This is just what I've experimented with so far. So that was a very useful thing to get through in my setup. I also ended up buying another one to route my network cable, and this actually was very useful around my house. So similar kind of thing, and this is a 1/4 inch, again 18-inch long, and so I can go through walls and route network cable. So I love my hardwired internet, and so that's what I did for that. Very, very, very useful in connecting your entire setup. So drilling holes is a risk. You want to think about, oh geez, if I have to fill this in later, how am I going to do that? Or do I really want to put it here? Do I know what's behind the wall before I drill through it? Having a bit of sense of where my electrical sockets are routed and wires behind that, or if I'm going to come out on the other end and oops, there was a chimney there or something like that. Thinking about things where in that kind of x-ray vision view about how you're drilling that hole. That's another risk in putting those cables or drilling holes through the sides of your house or through anything. I talked about maintenance a little bit, but it's worth repeating that you want to continually revisit your setup especially at the, not just the beginning. Check your connectors. How tight are they? Did you screw them all the way in? Did you screw them too tight such that you won't be able to undo it if they get a little bit of rust on them? Are they appropriately, weather stripped and sealed? These things you might want to take the clock and advance it forward, months and years, and think about how this setup could break down and cause problems, and then thinking about how you can check up on that in the future and noting things. Take pictures. What does it look like at the very beginning when you first set it up to over time, and seeing how things can change over time. That's very important. And I did talk about another video, grounding with lightning protection and all that kind of stuff. I actually have a lightning arrestor here that I will show off. I just actually got a new one because I'm looking at changing my antenna. So this was just something that I found on Amazon. So I did go to Amazon in this case, but it's worth thinking about other suppliers and checking certifications too. When I talked about is this particular thing certified through the vendor, on your setups with the manufacturer of the hotspot. Is this particular antenna certified? I think in general, if a bunch of people are really trying to pursue upgrading their antenna support, the best from my research, it's really encouraged that we start working back with these manufacturers to certify different antennas with their particular device, because then it will make it appropriate or able for us to use those in a legal sense. Not that it's illegal, but it's fringe stuff, and so you really want to be careful on that. Think back to my cell phone tower and the EMI example. So now that I've got this out, here's the lightning arrestor, and this is an N type. So here we've got the male end, and you can see let's see if we can get the camera to focus a little bit better. So anyways, that's male on that end and then female on this end, and this matches up with my cabling that I'm getting and the antenna that I'm connecting it to. So this is a lightning arrestor, and you also have this interesting thing right here, and this is for grounding. So the intention is if lightning were to enter, of course, then it would escape through this little thing and have grounding back out to your mast. So you'll want to take that with something like this. So this is gauge 10 wire, and you can see there how, there we go. So it's just a little bit of wire with some coating on it, and then you would put it into this little red piece after stripping it, of course, a little bit, and then stick it in there and then crimp it to make sure that it doesn't come out. That's an important thing to remember. Make sure that everything's crimped. So make sure you get like a good wire crimpers or cutters or strippers for working with this type of stuff. And how I found this stuff out, I talked about a little bit in a previous video, was I had an electrician come out to my house and ground my over-the-air TV mast, because I was concerned about lightning protection there. And so all they did actually was they got something like this, and this is 25 feet of it, could be up to 50 feet depending on your particular setup, but this is all that it is. And so I ran that from my mast. So I used a grounding clamp, which I forgot, I could have showed that, but you use a grounding clamp to your mast, and then of course you would use your lightning arrestor connected with your wire to connect back to this grounding cable, and then that would go down to your grounding rod. So more equipment to hopefully help you understand your setup and what you can do. So grounding is very important. And then lastly, I'll show off, this is an antenna that I have had for a while because I was planning on getting some a new setup, and I haven't even taken the plastic off this, and I gotta back up quite a ways because this is a Nearson 9 dBi antenna. I saw some people saying that this was really good for coverage, and I think, I don't necessarily know if it was certified. Well, it's not certified with any particular manufacturer, but there's definitely a lot of professional literature on the install and use of this. And so that's what I'm using currently. There's also little, and I don't even understand all of this stuff. Feel free to put in comments about what these are, but you basically just put these and screw them in, and it helps provide signal different ways. So that's, and there's, I think, 6 of these or something like that that would go all the way around this. And then there's really cool mounting gear. I really wish that more manufacturers had mounting gear like this, because the cool thing about this, let me find the appropriate spot. Yeah, here we go. So this is a little kind of keyhole that you put a nut in here, and it goes directly into the antenna to keep it snug right in this space. And then it's also in a tube that protects the antenna, and then also has this awesome, you know, personally, I don't know, professionally mounted brackets. When you get these with other antenna manufacturers, that you might not have really good mounting apparatus. You might have to go to your local hardware store to find something better than what's available. So I really like this mounting solution. Of course, I haven't mounted it yet, but compared to what I have been using, this is really, really good. You'll still want to make sure that you're appropriately tighten these, and then back to that maintenance topic, you're checking these from time to time. It's really important to verify your setup, because if this high wind all of a sudden, you know, and you don't have this placed appropriately, it could almost fly off, and then all of a sudden you've lost your, you know, $120 antenna, or whatever you spent on that antenna. So very important to maintain your setup and check it often, because there's liability involved in that too if it were to fly off and hit somebody, or, you know, even just damage your setup such that you can't mine for 2 weeks while you order a new antenna. Very, very important things to think about as you're doing this. So that takes care of kind of all the equipment that I talked about, or that's in setups that I've used so far. If you have more questions, absolutely put it in the comments, and I will get to them as I can. Again, indoor outdoor units, what's the pros and cons? It's really about what setup that works for you, and what the nuances of your availability and serviceability. You know, in the middle of winter, it's not very easy to climb up to my roof, just because of where I live. So it's very important to think about things like that for accessibility, and where you'd want to put that hotspot. If you just need a simple reboot and you have an extension cord going to it, well, that's not too bad. But if you have to drive 20 miles to access your hotspot, and to do that, and you can't do it remotely, that encounters a little bit more difficulty. So think about that as you're considering whether you want to go indoor or outdoor with your setup. Remember, weather is your biggest problem, will be your biggest problem, so plan in some amount of maintenance to your hotspots if they are outdoor units. And then think about is the ROI, the return on the investment, worth the risk of replacing? If you're going to do this a lot, and really think of it like a hobby income, or even maybe more serious, like a passive income, that you do this on the weekends type thing, you definitely want to think about having some inventory on hand, such that it will you can replace really quickly and keep your miners up, and keeping that HNT flowing. I hope this has been helpful for you. If you have questions, please drop them in the comments. If I'm wrong, absolutely call me out. I love it. I appreciate learning and all this too. Hit the subscribe, hit the like, share it with your friends, talk about it, and participate in the Helium Discord. That's where I find the best information, and where all the nerds get together and talk about their setups and trade details, trade tricks, all that kind of stuff. So if you want more of what's in this video, really do get on the Discord, as that's where the center of information is kind of flowing out as we go through with this. So good luck with your setups. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and tell your friends, like and subscribe. See you later.